I think we've got our group here. It is past 5 o'clock. The door, Maria is back, so we will call the December 1st, 2022 meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission to order. Can we have the roll, please?
Yes. Chairman Lane.
Here.
Commissioner Sibley.
Here.
Commissioner Barnard.
Here.
Commissioner Gayu.
Here.
Commissioner Goon.
Here.
Commissioner Jacoby.
Here.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Here.
Thank you.
Great, so we do have a quorum. We'll move on to approval of the October 6, 2022 meeting minutes. Do any commissioners have any corrections or comments regarding those? If not, I'll entertain a motion. Okay, I've got a motion to approve the minutes by Commissioner Barnard, seconded by Commissioner Gayu. All those in favor, raise your hand. Aye. Any opposed? None. The minutes are approved unanimously. Okay, report from the chair. I don't have anything in particular personally here, but I would like to take the opportunity to recognize Commissioner Goon, who unfortunately is on her last meeting here. So we want to thank you for your time on the commission, and I really do appreciate the often sort of counterpoint arguments that you brought and some different perspectives. It's been very good to have you here, and we will miss you. Now let me go ahead and give you the mic here.
Well, thank you very much. I was going to have closing comments thanking all of you. I've learned so much about all of this, housing and architecture and historical preservation, all of that, and I've learned so much from all of you, and it's been a pleasure to serve here. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I do have a little certificate of appreciation, so if you want a little photo op, we can do that right up front. It seems to be the thing that people like doing.
And a bag of chips.
Either that or a gold watch, too.
Okay, next on our agenda would be communications from HPC staff liaison.
Good evening. I do have some additional items that will come up during prior business. However, just as a quick update, we are finally have some staff on board, and so I will be able to pay more attention to historic preservation, and first order of business will be to put together a grant application for a survey plan, to get that, to try and make some progress on that. So still getting, one person is still starting next week, I think, a couple weeks. So, but we do have a new senior planner on board, so we're throwing her into the deep end on development review. So, so yes, so hopefully that should start to free up some of my time so I can put much more focus on historic preservation. So that's, I think, excellent news for all of us.
It is.
So, and we have had an inquiry about landmarking a property. I don't know if that's going to go anywhere, but so stay tuned on that one. That's pretty much all I have under just the general HPC communication.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. Any commissioners have questions for staff at this moment? No? All right, great, thanks. Okay, I don't have the list, but this is public invited to be heard. So if there is anyone in the audience who would like to come up and offer a comment, do we have anyone out there?
Well, as a matter of fact, I do have a thing or two to say, so. Thank you, Terry. And thank you to all of you, but, damn, a certificate. Thank you for all your hours and hours, and I'll get it when I'm ready to talk, and the timer goes on. My glasses. I mean, it's made for 12 people. Okay, I am ready.
Okay.
Good evening, Historic Preservation Commission. What?
Oh,
You don't think they can hear me? Come on.
I reset you.
Thank you. Good evening, Historic Preservation Commission, Sharon O'Leary, 534 Emery Street. Sorry I wasn't here in October. I thought we both needed a vacation from one another. But then you stood me up last month. Well, regardless. While I was on vacation, I could not stop thinking about you. I was in Yellowstone National Park staying at the Old Faithful Lodge. It was magnificent, and the entire time I kept thinking how thankful I was of past generations that had the foresight and took responsibility to ensure preservation. Old Faithful Lodge exterior represents the time period, and the interior is a work of art. The preservation and care that has gone into that structure ensures that many generations to come will be able to enjoy its beauty. Preservation is vital. Without it, we wouldn't have national parks, national forests, open space, historical buildings, churches, cathedral, small quaint homes, majestic buildings, and historical neighborhoods. A few weeks ago, neighbors were cleaning out the home where their father lived, and he too was a preservationist in the historic East Side. They gave me a box of papers and documentations from the founding years and reminded me of how we preserved the Henna neighborhood. Back when then we were citizens for a sensitive revitalization. Our neighborhood formed because in 1961, Longmont City Council did not give the East Side the same zoning as the historic West Side. Our neighborhood received a combination zoning of R3 and R4 that allowed up to 4-unit development in certain sections of our neighborhood. And then in 1967, high-density residential use permitted throughout the entire neighborhood, despite the fact that 80% of the housing was single-family. After years of working and meeting on committees with city staff and council, we basically did the heavy lifting and received our RLE zoning. So here we are today, 1 year from when city council instructed planners to come back with some sort of historic preservation guidelines, but not on the same level as historic designation. Our neighborhood gave the city planners a complete guideline, and to this day, nothing has happened. There is a proposal that's being worked on that would be a blanket zoning for the historic East Side and West Side, but that's doomed the day it comes off the printer. The East Side has been preserved for close to 40 years. The West Side has a different vision. We helped save the Carnegie Library when the city was selling it for $1. Then we reused these signs to make signs for in front of homes for carriage rides that ran the week before Christmas for the next 6 years. We are preservationists. What I'm asking you to do tonight is to please make a motion and second it and ask to have a conservation overlay zone for the historic East Side and send it to City Council. You have the ability to preserve. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no one else in the audience, we'll go ahead and close the public invited to be heard and move on to new business, which is planning for the coming year.
Good evening, Chairman. So this is just an item really to start thinking about 2023. So moving forward in terms of priorities for the year, wanted to pose the question of how you would prefer to go about setting your priorities. Okay. How you would wanted to go about setting your priorities, whether it be in a regular meeting or doing a retreat. We haven't done, this commission has not done a really focused planning retreat since 2021. So wanted to present that item to the commission for consideration and to discuss as a business, as basically a business item to discuss. Another option, another item that should be considered either as part of an agenda or part of a retreat would basically be a refresher on open meeting rules, et cetera, as we have new commissioners coming on board. And just really kind of refresh everyone on kind of what the rules and guidelines are, and that could either be incorporated into a meeting with our city attorneys coming to just kind of brush everyone up on that, or as part of a larger retreat. So wanted to pose those suggestions and questions to the board for discussion. Or to the
Okay.
commission, I should say.
Right. As always, I have my own opinions, but I'll defer to the commission to, if anybody's got any thoughts or questions. Yeah, Commissioner Barnett, let me get you there. Oh, go ahead. Where are you? No, you are seat 3, so. The other button. There you go.
Thank you. I took a look at when I first came on, took a look at the retreat minutes from 2021, and I've just found them to be extremely valuable. And I think I've always been in favor of those types of ways of dealing with planning issues, of because it takes time to do something like that. And it's a big time investment, but I think it produces good results. The only thing I would ask is that if we do something like that, that we have come out with, we came out with clear points in the 2021 retreat, and I'd like to just see that the points be extended a little bit with timelines on them, because there were like 7 or 8 points, but when would we do each one, and when would we accomplish each one? Because there's no way we can accomplish all of them at the next meeting. And so some of them just get laid aside until sometime when they just might come up again in the course of business. But if it's part of a plan of a retreat, I would support would be one that had specific timelines coming after it.
Thank you. Other commissioner? Yeah, I'd certainly be in favor of a retreat if we can all get together and make a time. I think between the goofiness of the interruptions of, the pandemic and then new staff and many new commissioners, I think it would be really valuable to just kind of sit back, refocus, plot out some courses of action, and have some resources available to guide those courses of action when we say, well, we'd like to do this, and somebody says, well, it can't look like that. It has to be, to be steered one way or the other so that we can be effective. I think that would be very valuable. So if we can, what would be we'll have a meeting the first part of January. That's typically the, who's new officers, ratify the bylaws, so on and so forth. So I would say sometime, late January or at the latest in February would be an appropriate time to have that happen.
That seems reasonable. I can work with Maria and we'll see if we can identify meeting space and such and come up with some possible dates.
It seems like the last one was May, and I don't know if there was any magic to that, or that's just what worked out.
Yeah, I think it just took that long, to get
Right.
Yeah. So earlier would be better.
You're right.
All right, that's what I've got on that.
Great, thank you. Any other comments on coming up? Nope, all right. Okay, well, let's go on to talking about a few things from past business. update on commissioner interviews, I guess. And for those, I will recuse myself since I was one of the interviewees. So I think that means Commissioner Gayu, you have the floor as the vice chair of the meeting.
Those interviews, I'm not sure what I could say about that. Is there someone who attended those interviews? I will give you the floor.
Well, one candidate was, removed himself from the list before our interviews. One candidate was unavailable for the interviews, so we had two candidates for two positions. And they both have experience already, and I think they were both well-received, but I haven't heard the official rules, the determination as far as the board this year, commission.
Sure, so staff, I forwarded the recommendations of the interview committee to the city clerk's office. So Commissioner Lane and Commissioner Barnard, you should be either, if you haven't received an invitation for council interviews, one should be forthcoming. So we did recommend that council interview both of you for a regular commission, the full commissioner position. Mr. Fenster was unable to attend his interview, but we did interview him back in May as part of the mid-year nomination cycle. And we did find him to be qualified as well, so we did recommend that he be considered and interviewed for the alternate position, so that we would have an alternate.
And I think council is doing the interviews on next Saturday, not this coming Saturday. And then it'll be on a council agenda, and they'll make appointments. And that'll be in December. I'm not sure what that agenda is, but
I believe that's December 10th.
10th?
Okay.
We have not received those materials yet.
Right.
On the day we know when
Okay.
Ah.
You should be receiving them at some point soon, because I know Michelle was frantically putting everything together this week. So.
Okay, great. So there is no real action here, right? This is just
No,
a
these are
discussion item.
discussion
Right,
items.
yeah, okay, fair enough. Well, unless anyone else has any other comment, we'll move on. That includes everyone that's here. Obviously, Commissioner Norton is absent, but she's still on the commission. Commissioner Goon's seat would then be filled by Mr. Lester as an alternate?
Fenster?
Or Fenster, sorry, Fenster. You're,
Commissioner Goon's a regular member.
You're the current alternate.
I would be, if not approved, filled. And then Commissioner,
yeah,
and
yeah.
Mr. Fenster would take my seat, which is the alternate. My mic wasn't on, but did you hear that?
Yeah, so, I see, so you're,
I'm the alternate right now,
okay,
and then Mr. Fenster would take mine, and then I would take Terry's seat as the regular.
right. Okay, fair enough, great. Okay, next item is the Dickens Barn. What do we have for new news on that?
So still working on it. We are, staff, and which I would be the staff, is reviewing the site plan and plat for this project. We are, the applicant is still planning to dedicate the barn and some adjacent properties to the city, so that the barn can be preserved. I'm working with our legal staff to determine the best mechanism for doing that. So we're just working through the procedural issues at this point. So once all of that is finalized, it would probably be in the first quarter upon once the final plat is finalized, then we could look at pursuing additional grant opportunities for the further rehabilitation and stabilization of the barn. Part of the dedication would include basically a cash in lieu dedication as well to specifically for stabilization work from the developer.
So will we see them back here at all? Do they need to come back for any kind of a final approval?
Yeah, ultimately you have to make a action on, because the plant, well, ultimately the city council said HPC has to approve the preservation plan. We didn't really define what that is. So we do envision that you'll have to take an action on that.
Okay. But that, it's essentially more or less a done deal. The Parks and Rec has already accepted.
We hope it's a done deal, yeah.
All right. Okay, as done
I
as
think
done
preserving the
gets.
barn would be is the ultimate
Right.
preservation plan from staff standpoint.
Right, okay. Questions from commissioners? No? Oh, yeah.
Is there any update on the status of the outbuildings and the rest of the property? I'm not, last time I asked about that, that was still premature, but have you made a determination on that?
Well, the original farmhouse and some of the other outbuildings are underneath the future 7-Eleven, so they are gonna go. And then I think the only other ones, there was a chicken shack that I think is pretty much collapsed on itself. So as of now, it really leaves the barn. That'll be preserved. So as you know, what we originally presented, if we still want to do something symbolic for the original farmhouse, that potentially is something you could still consider. They were proposing outlining the foundation, I think, in the parking maneuvering areas, and maybe doing a couple other things. I think there were some commissioners that thought, that maybe that's not the best way to do it, but we can certainly discuss that when it comes before you.
All right. Okay, then let's move on to the next item, which is HPC code amendment status. And it looks like we have a kind of outline from Glenn here to discuss.
You need to go into edit document order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Recently, I had a conversation with Chairman Lane and talked about the code amendments, and we've had some good discussions with council in executive session and in public meeting. But I think I realized that maybe we shotgunned a whole lot of things at everybody, and it got to be maybe a bigger project than what we had originally, or what HPC maybe originally envisioned. So I thought it might be a good idea to kind of go back to, I think it was 2021, and it started in the retreat where you were revising the code. And I took directly from one of the agendas of your meeting what you felt were the major issues. And then I thought I could walk through these and then say our attorney that worked on it identified some key legal issues. Staff threw kind of our wants in there, and there were certainly some things that came out of council. So I'll walk through this. I thought I'd kind of lead you in a prioritizing exercise to say what are the key things, with the idea of let's maybe hit your really top items first. And then perhaps as we do a more overall, a more thorough overhaul of the land development code, we can do some of the other things. And then my intent is, I've talked to our city attorney about it. He thinks maybe it's a good idea. I'll go back to city council at some point and say, do you agree with this approach to address these things in this way? Maybe more of a smaller amendment, but I know I heard from HPC that you had some priorities, probably around demolition. But I thought I kind of walked through this cheat sheet that I provided for you, I have up on the screen. And the first thing was demolition by neglect. I didn't put these in any kind of order, so don't get biased by what's number one. But there was certainly a concern that just somebody neglecting their historic property would just succumb it to being torn down. So how do we kind of halt that? There was a feeling by HPC we need to define what's an extraordinary historic significance. You know, that was a good call because our attorney said the same thing. We need more criteria of what is potentially historic. We added in, we do identify in our code right now, we talk about archaeological significance, but we don't have a definition for that. And I think the big one was revise the demolition review procedures. Right now, I think it says anything in the original town site, and then the code also says if we have a survey that identifies something as significant outside that area, that potentially it would go through a review process. And right now, the code, the process is it gets reviewed by the liaison and a council member, which I think would be our council member Rodriguez, would look at that and decide whether that demolition should go up to the HPC or whether it's not significant enough and maybe should just be approved as far as for demolition. I think HPC thought it ought to really just go to the Historic Preservation Commission. So that's really, I think, the meat of that matter. There was a question about city-owned properties and do the same process apply to them? I think we had recently gone through the silo designation that was brought forward by a resident. There was a concern by the HPC that maybe we restrict the ability to revoke your designation. And if you're a landmark property, locally landmarked, you should stay that way. And there shouldn't really be a process to undo that. That was one thing. We didn't really address in our code enforcement or penalties if somebody goes ahead and ignores the code and you know, tears down a property that's potentially been designated. And then I think there was something about notice of certified neighborhoods, if we have a certificate of appropriateness, or you're creating a new district or you're creating a landmark, that we had widened the scope of that notice. I left a couple of blanks because maybe I missed a few. If some of you have a better memory of that draft code, or do you think that kind of hits the big ones?
Thanks. I think that does, I think you had a really good summary of the demolition piece for sure. That I think that really captured at least what I recall from all those discussions, right? And some of the ancillary stuff is filled in the time since, right? So what I recall from those earliest of meetings was the very first item of importance was just revising this demolition code, because at currently it's a really low bar for somebody to take a building down, and once it's down, it's done. And we felt like we wanted to get that bar raised up a notch or two or three. And so relative to demolition by neglect and the demolition review procedures and the associated enforcements and penalties, I think that's where this all started. Like, and then
Okay.
Other things have sort of conglomerated onto the process.
It's a definition of mission creep, I think, maybe. And part of that certainly is, well, we did bring in outside counsel who identified some legal issues with our code the way it is right now, really having to do with due process, which was if I have a property that's in the original town site, it's 50 years old, I don't necessarily know that, and I don't know that there's potentially land use restrictions on it. So that started a whole nother train that was, how do you do that? Well, we do that normally through zoning, and that's where they created the historic preservation overlay. So that in those areas, we'd create an overlay so that if we're rezoning your property, you're aware of what the rules are. So it really grew quite a bit. And then, as I mentioned before, they identified just being 50 years old maybe isn't enough. Maybe it can be a little bit tighter as far as what those criteria are. And then we added on, oh, well, while we're at it, why don't we look at the certificate's appropriateness, and is there a staff level versus an HPC level? And while we're at it, let's just move the whole thing into the land development code because it's a land use process. So then we have this great big animal. So what I thought we'd do, and maybe it's not gonna take long, is what we normally do when we have a list like this with a group or a board, what are your top three? And what do you think would be, as far as timing wise, the most important? Not that we're gonna ignore them all. And then our hope is we can kind of come up with an idea of how to kind of move forward on those changes, talk to council about it and see if they're willing to go that direction. And then we could be very close to addressing some things. So you've got 9, 8. If you were to pick your top three, we can just go around the room and see what they are, if that is agreeable.
Yeah. Oh, okay, perfect. Commissioner Goon.
I remember back in that retreat that we had when we were talking about demolition by neglect, one of my major concerns was East Side historic neighborhoods it had been an affordable neighborhood. So you've got you do have a lot of poverty there. I live there, and I owned my home forever before I could fix the foundation. So I'm not quite sure how that reads, when we're talking about a developer purposefully neglecting an old shed in the backyard that they don't want to use anymore, and they want to tear it down, and so they think that they can get away with something, versus somebody who just can't afford to fix the old shed, and they're kind of waiting until life changes and it becomes the priority. The kids are out of the house or whatever it is, and so that one really bugs me. I know I'm leaving, but that one really bugs me because I live there. It's been my life. I pay for things as they go along. I save up money and then fix them. But priorities are always, you're constantly balancing them. And for us as a commission to determine, because you live in this house, we get to set your priorities, bothers me. So just FYI.
And I might add, there's nothing to say you can't come to one of these meetings and express your opinion during any of these processes. So please, you are welcome back. Commissioner Barnett, get your mic on.
Looking at this summary and also looking back at the May 5th memo on what the commission's ideas were May 5th of 2022, and then also my memory of the retreat and also the recent joint meeting with City Council, demolition seemed to be a fairly big deal. And it was the one where there didn't seem to be good communication back and forth between the city and staff and the commission. So I'd say that if we want to start, I would, rather than have three things, I think there's enough under the issue of demolition, whether it's, here you've got demolition procedures include original town site, remove liaison, and council member review. In the May memo, you talk about demolition permit review, applicability, procedure, and criteria. That's, I mean, that alone, I think, would take through the end of the year to resolve, just because it's tough, they're tough issues. And I think if you try to, my feeling is if you try to tack on more stuff, then we'll lose our focus on what appears to have been a major issue for us for the last several years.
Thank you. Other commissioners? Good. Just press your thing that I can get you. Yeah. Okay. All right, Commissioner Gayu.
I mean, I've been on the commission for, I don't even know, magically for like 10 years now. I don't know how that happened, but when we were talking about that when I came onto the onto the commission. So it's been a long, long time, and I would say, I mean, to be honest, I think under the enforcement and penalties part of it, you could also just, bracket a lot of these demolitions, because that's kind of the heart of it is, the demolition by neglect, the procedures, the oversight of it is a big part of it is that, if you tear your house down, it costs like $50, it's like a $50 fine. Even if it's on the National Register, it's, and locally designated and everything else. It just, until we have a piece where there's actually some consequences for doing that sort of thing, it's we can put all the codes, and definitions of demolition by neglect, which generally speaking is never going to be somebody, not painting their house in time. It's going to be, a developer buys a house, lets it sit there for a couple years till it falls down so that they can scrape it. So for me, the number one issue would be the enforcement and penalties, which would actually bring some action.
Thank you. Commissioner Sibley or?
Actually, yeah, I was just gonna say, basically the same thing, it's really the demolition.
Hold that thought.
Sorry. Oh,
Try it.
see, it's like red means go instead of green, I'm sorry. No, I was gonna say, that, demolition is sort of the top thing too, because really, once those places are gone, they're gone. And, so, I think that is probably biggest on my list. But I don't know how, in going through those kinds of things, like with the overlays and the zoning and all those kinds of things, I would imagine that all has to tie together. So in my head, I'm like, okay, there's your basket. It's full. So, so I guess I'm with everybody here with the demolition as kind of being the priority, so.
Okay,
That's it.
thank you. Okay, Commissioner Jacoby.
Yeah, thank you. I agree, demolition should be number one. It irreplaceable loss is our priority before we get the rest of our stuff in order here. So revising demolition review procedures, I think, is definitely important. Demolition by neglect is a very thorny issue. Properties' rights, I agree with Terry, is very important. But I do know, again, there was a property on Atwood about 10 years ago, one of the original colony homes that was stripped down to basically framing and then left for 2 years. And then they decided, well, we got to build something here. And because what they had was no longer usable. And so demolition by neglect is a definite issue. I think it's thorny, but I think it can be worked around. But it's such a big issue right there. How do you define that? Getting the lawyers involved, making that part of it is going to be, that's going to be enough for you to chew on. But again, enforcement and penalties is part of that, because if we don't have reasonable teeth behind all this, everything you put on paper is kind of, they'll laugh it off. And getting back to that includes revocation of designation. I think you could make a simple penalty for revocation of designation. I don't know what amount that would be, but I think we could just include that. And that wouldn't take a lot of brain power. And that would give a little teeth to people maintaining their historic designation. Again, I think when we looked at that subdivision of the farm property a couple of months ago, we had really no say in it because they could just revoke their designation and subdivide if we didn't agree to some sort of plan for them. I think if we had a little bit of teeth behind revocation, with a little bit of a penalty at least of some kind, I think that would help out. So I think all of those are kind of intertwined and connected, but that would be more than enough.
Right now, revocation's in your purview. That is something that has come through HPC. It's not something somebody can just decide and let it go. What they were asking on the property that Jennifer worked on is, can we move those buildings? They were moving historic buildings, right? So, yeah, they're once you're designated, they have to come back to you. I think what the HPC was thinking is, let's shut that door, perhaps, if somebody's a landmark. So that would be a change. That'd be a pretty serious change.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I would just wrap up by saying, again, I think if you're gonna, obviously you see the demolition is the big one. It was what started this all, as I mentioned. And then I don't know that you can parse out anything associated with demolition and handle only that. You just have to take on the pieces that include demolition. So that means talking about demolition by neglect, talking about the review procedures, talking about the enforcements and penalties, and coming up with a comprehensive direction for that component, right? And I think if we can do that as a focus, and we can get some surveys, grants for surveys started, and then have a retreat, it feels like we have, the retreat can handle the bigger pictures, because we're not going to create an overlay district tonight. It's not gonna happen. That's a huge project that needs public involvement. But if we can get some direction on the demolition piece and really dial that into what we want to accomplish, and then there's been a lot of work that's been done already. So I think it's really circling back, putting this together, understanding what city attorney perspective is on what has already been drafted, and then getting this commission to refocus on it. I think that, I don't know that it should take, a massive amount of time.
Right. Yeah, and I think the key to the demolition is refining that criteria too. So that was kind of part of my discussion with our city attorney, May. So I think we could do something a bit scaled down that would address the demolition part of it. But again, we have had this discussion with council. I'll return some way back to them and see if they agree with that direction, and we'll hopefully address the demolition much quicker than the whole rewrite and moving it into the land development code.
Right, that was gonna be my question. This would not involve any kind of move into the land use code at this point. We just revise
in
the
the mind.
ordinance, and that's
Right.
it for now.
Yeah, in my mind, I'd still work within that chapter 2.5 of the municipal code, where it is now. But I appreciate the conversation, and it helps me because I was just coming in as you were doing that. So I'm just going back through notes without any flavoring to it, trying to figure out what was key. So it did kind of blossom into a very big project. So I think this might help us get off the dime and at least address, I think, your principal concern. So I appreciate that.
Great, thank you. Any other commissioner questions or comments on this? Perfect, thank you. Oh, yes? All right, Commissioner Goon.
I would also recommend incentives. I'm not creative enough to come up with what people want or what they like other than money, which we have the tax incentives. So, something that would make people want to not demolish their homes, you know, carrots. Thanks.
Right. Thank you. All right, Commissioner Barnett.
Yes, one thing I think would be helpful to me, since you're in the early stages of preparing what you're going to do here, is if we had some comparables. We don't have to necessarily invent the wheel. We have an old code. A lot of codes have been revised since then. Neighborhood, county, other cities in the county that might have specific ideas that they've perhaps more recently adopted into their codes. And just going through this briefly, I just saw that Boulder has a one-page explanation of what a demolition is. It's one page with pictures. And if it meets that criteria, it's a demolition. Then it probably has a lot of other words to go along with it, but it seems pretty simple. We don't have, I don't think we need to limit ourselves to the county. There might be some smart cities out there that you might know about, or that, like Austin, Texas, or Madison, Wisconsin, or others that are comparable cities that have been through this process. I know it doesn't take much searching online to find a lot of historical preservation code references. And I think it would be helpful going in if we saw what you're proposing and how it fits in with what the general tone of these types of solutions is. Not that we can't do something unique, but let's see where we are with respect to others. Because those others have also survived the private partnership and the public partnership issues to get where they were.
Sure, yeah, we're certainly not unique, but I think just about every city in Colorado at least has historic preservation requirements.
Yeah, thank you. And I do remember that I think Planner Schumacher had brought, he had a couple.
We had like a whole list of different, cities with different requirements, mostly Colorado-centric, but certainly outside of the county. So you might ask Brian if he
Cool.
still has that somewhere.
We've done that already, Doug.
At least in Colorado.
Roll it back out again.
We can handle that. We can find something in a file.
Right. Might be as much work to find it as to find it again, but that's how those things go. All right.
Excellent, thank you very
Great.
much.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the effort. Okay, we'll go, unless there's any other comment? Yep.
Just thinking about Terry's comment about carrots rather than sticks, which is always a much easier way to approach things. Another carrot, something I brought up multiple meetings ago was the certificate of merit. And it follows kind of the federal rules as being making houses notable. And I know other cities, Boulder's use it a lot. But if it had some carrots attached to it, maybe we can't give tax breaks the way the rules are written, but maybe we could forgive permitting fees, city permitting fees, in exchange for some control of development of the house. So it's just, but the certificate of merit, we could put some carrots in and use more, because I don't think the city's used it very much here. I may be mistaken, but right now it's a worthless piece of paper that says, nice try, bucko, but your place isn't landmarked. And I think we could do something with that.
Mm-hmm.
So
I like that idea. Right. Yeah, it's, if you don't hit the landmark, then you get a certificate of merit. It's kind of, yeah.
So basically a landmark light.
It is.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think we actually talked about giving someone, I can't remember, maybe it was I think actually it was somebody that we ended up, the commission decided to landmark, but there was discussion back and forth about whether it was worthy, and it was sort of on the edge, and that was something that we were talking about as a, potential stepping stone of encouragement or something. I mean, I think there's opportunity to throw that out there, discuss it, and try to figure out a way but it would be good to make it worth something more than just a nice try stamp, right? I mean, because everybody knows what the reality of that is. All right, great. Thank you. Thank you for the comments. All right, we'll go ahead and close that portion of the meeting. And then we are on to just comments from the HPC commissioners. Commissioner Goon.
I'll just reiterate, it's been a pleasure working with you guys and getting to know you all a little bit, and it's been fun. Thank you for all of your knowledge and for listening to me kindly.
Commissioner Gayu.
I was just wondering if you knew whether you were gonna get any scholarships for the CPI conference in February for commission members?
Yeah, I'm sure we can.
Okay.
We do have a pretty healthy budget as far as for training, so I don't, is that what we call them, scholarships for
Well,
commissioners?
you can actually apply for money to give scholarships to commission members for
Oh.
registration fees, yeah,
Oh,
so,
well, if we can't get money, we'll find it.
okay.
Is there, is there maybe a possible head count of people interested in, yes, Suzanne, Doug?
In what?
It's History Colorado's,
Well, no, it's CPI, so Colorado Preservation Inc. They have an annual preservation conference every year. So there's a lot of different, it's a conference.
Yeah, there's some fun ones and some very highly technical,
Yeah.
let's talk about, you know,
Yeah, and then there's, happy hours.
stucco.
Important stuff.
Yep. All right, Commissioner Barnett.
When one of my first meetings,
Okay.
one of my first meetings, thanks,
all
you
right.
took care of it
You keep
for me.
doing that to me.
One of my first meetings, there was a discussion of a brochure. And I know it went back to staff, and I know you've been short-staffed. And I think you used Louisville was one of the examples that the commission said they liked. And I was just wondering, I haven't heard anything about that at the last few meetings, and I was just wondering where that stood as far as staff time, staff work.
As I remember, I think it was, we were discussing a historic preservation plan, of which Louisville has done, and then they've collapsed the major points into a handout. So I think we need the plan first, and that's something that we are trying to find funding for, through our CLG. So, but it's definitely a good idea, and we did I think Louisville did a very good example of what a plan could look like. So the short answer is we haven't done anything. But it's definitely on our to-do.
Commissioner Jacoby.
Here's the red light. All right. Just to address Sharon O'Leary's concerns. I mean, she wants us to make a motion for a conservation overlay zone for the historic east side. I've mentioned that before as a possibility, and we had the RLE1 zoning that was restrictive and did help preserve the neighborhood for a long time. I think it'd be easy to, seems easy to me, being naive and not working through all the channels, but to just reinstate that until we get somewhere. But I think that would take energy and time away from making the larger conservation overlay that we are trying to work on. And the last time it was presented, it was going to be individual houses. And in the joint meeting with City Council, I think everybody agreed that this would be better in districts rather than houses. And I'm just wondering, do we have any update on when are we going to get another presentation on where that's going or where is that at now?
Where is what? I'm sorry.
The proposal to make a conservation overlay of just of the individual houses was pretty much done by everybody, but where is that at now? Are we looking at making districts? Or if we are looking at districts, I don't think we should pursue Sharon's suggestion, as that would be just taking time away and valuable resources from making better districts. But if we're not looking at districts, I think what she requests has some merit, and maybe we should pursue it. So I'm just wondering where that discussion is at now.
Yeah, so that's where the historic preservation overlay came from.
Right.
Right. So, and that's the reason why I wanted to have this discussion. We don't necessarily have to do that to initially address the demolition issue.
Right.
Now, our code does have conservation districts, and it's really geared towards a neighborhood that wants to put special rules in their neighborhood, and it requires a certain percentage of everybody to sign on to that. So that is a much bigger deal, and it is kind of geared towards a community doing that, working on that, and not necessarily the city coming in and putting in a conservation district. So it is a much different animal. Now, part of the code amendments were referencing design guidelines, and that's something we told council we would do. I think that addresses part of the issue, but there are some of these beginning code amendments that need to happen first. And then we do have money in the budget to do the design guidelines as far as appropriate additions in certain areas.
Okay. All right, well,
Maybe not as heavy-handed as a conservation district, but I think it's, it would probably address a lot of the issues, I think, that are
Right.
concerns.
all right. I guess it depends on how you define the conservation overlay and what you put in it, how heavy-handed it gets. Maybe I'll talk to you some more about that again after the meeting and see where we can go with that. All right, thank you.
Right. And I might just add, I think that's the perfect thing for a retreat, right? That's the perfect, so we can really talk just in a more fluid way, hash things out, talk about what directions the commission really wants to spend time on. So I hold on to it for sure. Yeah. Any other commissioner comments? No? All right, I will just conclude again by thanking Commissioner Goon for your time. I really do appreciate your time and your perspective. It's very good to have different perspectives on this commission. It makes it a richer end result. Okay. Okay, all right. Just getting my attention. You've been working me today. I've been hitting this thing a lot tonight, so I just want to make sure I'm not missing anybody. Okay, comments from our city council representative.
First of all, I would also like to extend my thanks to Commissioner Goon for your service. Also, always my thanks to the entire commission for your service. It's definitely beneficial. You're getting to do a lot more now that the council's looking at the HPO and those kinds of things than normally we've done historically. And outside of that, I would like to wish everybody happy holidays, and also thanks to the staff, and happy holidays to you as well.
Great, thank you. All right, with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Okay, moved by Commissioner Goon in her last act, seconded by Commissioner Jacoby. All those in favor, say aye. Opposed, none. We are adjourned. Thank you all, and good night.